Hello, everyone. It's me, Allison. The show is about to start, but just real fast, a quick reminder. I want to tell you guys, if you are doing some shopping, perhaps some Black Friday shopping, holiday shopping, etc.,
like Christmas type shopping,
any sort of shopping at all, I have put together some lists on Amazon.
Lists with things
stuff
on them?
Daniel, just pipe down for 1 second. Beauty stuff, makeup stuff, home stuff, kids stuff, podcast equipment, books I recommend, all of this stuff. And
Daniel's stuff?
Oh, yeah, Daniel's Corner, where I put stuff that I know that he likes. But Daniel has recently gotten way more involved, and he put together a special Christmas spectacular gift guide for you.
You guys will not even believe it. I mean, I'm not going to tell you what's on there, but it's literally some things.
Lots of things. And a whole big caption explaining his process.
If you know someone who's exactly like me, they are going to love it.
And here's where you go to see all of this. Amazon.com/shop/Allison Rosen. Amazon.com/shop/Allison Rosen.
And we'll be adding to it.
It's nonstop, you guys.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the show.
Bye.
You guys, I lied. I said the show was starting right now, but I have one more quick announcement. I'm co-hosting a new podcast. It's brand new. It's called Upworthy Weekly. I'm co-hosting it with a guy named Todd Perry, who I'm having so much fun with, although he is wrong about so many things, especially Christmas music, but also other stuff. But anyway, Upworthy Weekly, we come out on Saturdays. Please give it a listen, subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, leave us a comment, a review on Apple Podcasts. That helps out the show so much, especially because we are brand new. As I've said, between 1 and 4 times right now, I've lost track. But anyway, please give it a listen. It's a lighthearted news podcast. We're taking a look at the most popular and engaging stories from the week before that ran on Upworthy. And it's just what your holidays need. And then when we're past the holidays, it's just what that part of the year needs. It's just exactly what you need. Please listen to it. Upworthy Weekly, new episodes every Saturday, wherever you get your podcasts.
Allison Rosen is your new best friend. Allison, with her the good times never end. Allison Rosen, doing the wavy pencil dance again. Allison, Allison's your new best friend.
Hey everyone. Hi. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Allison Rosen is your new best friend. Very excited to welcome my guest to the show. I will bring her in a sec. Now, normally this would be the spot in the show where I would chat with Tony Thaxton, my producer, AKA the bad boy of podcasting, nickname he gave himself. And I like to give him a lot of crap about that, but he is not here today to respond and to reclaim his good name because, as you know, he is still somewhere else in the country. He's on tour with Motion City Soundtrack. Their tour has been postponed. They are going to reschedule. He will be coming back, but it's complicated by he drove to Virginia, Michigan. I don't know. He drove to the East Coast with his dog Bentley, dropped his dog off at his parents', then went to Chicago. It's a whole thing. And this is really his story to tell. But anyway, that is why you're not getting that witty repartee right at the top between Tony and me that I know you count on. Anyway, enough of that. I don't know how you guys are feeling. I was actually just off mic saying to the guest, who I'll bring in a moment, I really wish I could be heading into the new year with this like recharged, refreshed, motivated January 1st spirit. And it feels like the 13th month of the year. Like I don't feel that at all. I feel like I need to sleep for 28 hours or more. And I'm wondering if everyone else feels that way too. I think it's just where we are in the pandemic. I think it's having kids who were sick, over the holidays. Again, it was not COVID, but still it was like they were sick and it lasted forever. And I've talked to other people now too, who also were like, oh yeah, we were all sick in November, December with not COVID. So whether it was COVID or not, it seems everyone was sick. Okay. Very excited to welcome to my show. She's a journalist. She's a podcaster. She hosts 2 podcasts, You're Wrong About and You Are Good. She is a singular talent and a juggernaut, and it is crazy how popular her shows are. Please put your hands together for Sarah Marshall.
Hello.
Tony, put the claps in here. Hello, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I've never been called a juggernaut before. It feels amazing.
What kind of like juggernaut synonyms do you usually get? And I think I said juggernaut, but I meant juggernaut.
Either way, I mean, I don't know. I feel like there's no synonym for juggernaut, and I don't know what it literally means. I know that it means like, you know, an unstoppable force, which I am. But I always picture it as like, I never realized this before, but my mental image when someone says that word is like a ship moving over land in a battle, and like one of those big Lord of the Rings battle scenes. But instead of an elephant, it's a ship on land.
Right.
That's what I am.
Wait, that's literally what it means, or that's what you picture?
That's not what it means, but that's what my head comes up with when it has to assign an image to that word, which it apparently does without being asked.
No, I love that. I love that. That's what you are. You are a ship moving over land. Anyway,
Yeah.
So You're Wrong About is like crazy popular. But just in case anyone listening is unfamiliar with the podcast, let's explain it to them. It is in the history section, and each episode revisits a topic that perhaps listeners are wrong about, right?
Yeah, and I co-founded it with Michael Hobbes. I'm now hosting it solo, and I've certainly gotten a lot of feedback over the almost 4 years now that it's been around, of people being like, well, I wasn't wrong about this at the time. And it's like, oh, I know, it's not called You're Wrong About Melanie. You know, it's like, it's sort of directed at what mainstream media was able to figure out, which often hinges on what story was it the most lucrative for them to be telling. And that often isn't very nuanced or intelligent, and individual people often did have things much better figured out than the kind of fossil record that was left by the news. But unfortunately, they weren't being asked at the time.
Right. So it's more like they were wrong about.
Yeah, it's like we're looking, kind of the twofold goal, I guess, is to say, what was going on in this story? How have we determined, at least more of the truth, since this was initially a giant and lucrative news story? Because my favorite, and I think the kind of classic episodes of the show, are the ones about someone like Lorena Bobbitt or Tammy Faye Baker or Fawn Hall and her role in Iran-Contra, which is a footnote to that one, but part of what made 1987 the year of the bimbo, this idea that Fawn Hall, Jessica Hahn, and Donna Rice had taken down all these powerful men in America. And really, if you looked at the stories beyond the surface, you're like, yes, there was a beautiful young woman standing there as a powerful man made years worth of terrible decisions and essentially imploded. And so the goal of the show is to try and figure out what actually happened, and then what were we saying was happening at the time, even when the truth was available, and what does our collective myth-making say about who we are and what kinds of pseudo-truths we choose, even when something closer to reality is very available to us.
I mean, I love looking at all the topics that you've covered, because for me, it feels like, well, I'm going to take a circuitous route to my question. I remember at one point getting on YouTube and looking up things from Sesame Street that I remember, but that I hadn't seen in years. Like this very psychedelic, weird song about the letter D. Like, did that actually exist? And also, like, was there really a little like vignette with two girls in a dollhouse? One, two little, and because I remember that, like, and then a kitten knocks it over and it makes me cry. And so I wanted
Smokey Robinson really sing "You Really Got a Hold on Me" to a letter U? Surely that can't have happened.
Right. Like I there's this nostalgic desire to go back and revisit things with adult eyes. And when I look through, and I'm a bit older than you are, but when I look through the topics that you guys have covered, it's just like, it's like being able to go back to all these news stories that shined so bright from my youth. Is there an element of nostalgia in it for you? And also, it's a two-part question. Like, what was your childhood like?
Oh, great question. I mean, I spent a lot of my childhood watching TV, and so I think that's a huge component of what the show is that TV is kind of this friend. I like 90s TV is a friend I look back on very fondly. And now I'm like, oh man, this friend I loved had so many issues and we got to deal with it.
This friend was on drugs, like that feeling.
Yeah, this friend needs an intervention, but a really gentle one over a period of many years. And you know what I find really nostalgic, and that at the time was being touted correctly as like a sign of the decline of civilization, was like stuff like hard copy, the aesthetic of hard copy, and like, remember like the noise of the hard copy logo? Because I think it had to like spin as it went into the screen, and it made this big impact noise like, ooh, that hard copy. That really is hard copy. It's like hitting a wall or something. I think the aesthetics of 90s TV news are, in retrospect, you know, at the time they felt and were so overpowered and were so damaging when they were let loose in people's lives. But at the same time, given the standards of communication we have today, they seem incredibly rinky-dink. And also, I guess there's something a little bit nostalgic. And I don't think that it was better this way. It's just that we're not going to have it back. Of like, we were focused like the Eye of Sauron on one big story at a time. And so like the eye of the press would like, you know, swoop over to Clackamas County, Oregon to harass Tanya Harding. And then it would swoop on over to New Hampshire to bother Pam Smart or whatever. But it would just like be swooping around the country.
Yeah. I mean, it was a
a
whole summer of O.J. Simpson.
Yeah. It was like, all right, I'm just going to stay swooped in on LA for a while. This is great. Can't look away TV.
And so what was your childhood like? Where did you grow up and what was it like?
So aside from watching TV, I grew up in the country outside Portland, Oregon, kind of in farmy country. And then also in Hawaii for several years, which was, you know, I think it's a valuable experience to live in a state that feels very ambivalent about being a state. More even than like Texas. And I would describe myself as a lonely adultified kid. I think when I was a kid, I felt like I was this old soul, which I got positive reinforcement for because I think adults like the idea of old souls because it means you'll sit quietly and read. But really, I was like a pretty silly, hyperactive. I think I was really like a kid on the inside, but I was doing a good job of being as adult as possible on the outside because I was around a lot of adults most of the time. And also it just felt safer. Like I was a kid. This is a great, this to me explains a lot. And I think I actually shoehorned into my current events that I wanted to talk to you about designing women. So I'm just bringing it up now. I remember when I was in like 6th grade, I went to a school that had a little uniform. We had a little white polo shirt and pink shorts. And I remember coming home and I would sit down on my mom's chair in front of the TV and I would put my hand in my shorts like Al Bundy and I would watch Designing Women reruns.
I'm still stuck on the fact that you had a cute uniform with pink shorts because I also wore a uniform, but we had like a plaid jumper thing and then upper school was a plaid
Tuesdays.
skirt. Okay. But
we had to wear a
shorts.
horrible little jumper on Tuesdays for chapel and we had a little tie. So the only way that I still know a square knot is because I had to do a square knot every week for 5 years.
Got it. So chapel, was your childhood religious?
My parents weren't religious, and so they sent me to Episcopalian schools, which in retrospect does make sense because I think Episcopalianism is like it's fun to go to church. Like, that's the aesthetic. They're like, you know what's a cool look? Church. Don't really think about it the other days, but it's fun.
Okay. So not because I've interviewed tons of people who talk about just the like Catholic guilt that was embedded in them. So it sounds like you don't have that.
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about that the other day because I feel like I talk about a lot of Catholic content on You're Wrong About, because there's some amount of kind of Catholicism leaping into pop culture in the 70s that I see as a base for the Satanic Panic in the 80s. So I've thought about that a lot. Like the exorcism is a fascinating pop culture phenomenon happening in a country that's, I think, seemed to be becoming terrifyingly secular in that moment, which certainly is an anxiety that hasn't gone away. But I feel like I don't have religious guilt, but I do have free-floating just guilt as an agnostic person so I feel like I'm sure that Catholicism itself is to blame for lots of guilt, but I bet it also just attaches itself to human guilt and is like, yes, it's mine. It's all mine.
Right. Right. I think the reason original sin is like such a pervasive, tenacious, it's not the right word, but like a sticky idea is because we all respond to it. We all have some level of that, whether we're
like,
religious or not.
I knew there was something wrong with me. Thank you. That's so it. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so you were an old soul, but you were a silly kid on the inside. By the way, I think that I was as well. I was like someone who always I felt more comfortable around adults than other kids. I always felt a bit like a misfit around other kids. What about you?
Oh, yeah. And I think adults, now as an adult, I'm like, oh, yeah, adults have so much more in common with little kids than I as a little kid ever thought to dream. I guess, we look different, but that's just, that's not the whole story. But yeah, I think adults maybe behave more predictably. And I was very close with my mom. And so I think I was a very verbal kid. And I think that kind of gave the illusion that I was more mature than I was at times, which is funny now. I think a lot now about because I have a bunch of friends who have toddlers or have had toddlers recently. And it's so funny to watch them acquire vocabulary because you say a word once or twice around them and then it's like fully assimilated. They're like these little supercomputers. And I was a kid who was often described as having a really big vocabulary. And now I'm like, boy, you get a lot of credit for just having that tape-like brain that little kids have.
Yeah. And it's funny to watch them, like you said, they'll hear it once or twice and then it'll assimilate. And they will, even if they don't quite know if they're using it right, they will go for it. Like they'll try out new words, which is fun to watch as well. Do you have siblings?
I have older half siblings who are like much older than me. So they were fully baked adults by the time I was born. So I got the only child experience.
I guess I'm wondering if you have ideas about what you describe yourself as lonely. Like what made you feel lonely?
I think just first of all, just geography, because we lived kind of out in the country. It wasn't walkable. Like, I think this is actually, I have a lot of theories, and one of them is that loneliness is an American problem, partly because of the way we expect Americans to live and American kids to grow up. Like if you live in a suburb where you can't really walk to see anybody that and where transit is in any way a pain, or where you can't do that as a kid. I think that just being able to, of your own volition as a kid, see other kids is important. And so that's something that I feel like contributed to that. And then, I don't know, I think that it was, I feel like the story for me, and I imagine this is true for a lot of people, is that I had kind of relatively happy-go-lucky social experiences, and then a big change occurred, which in this case was a move, and I wasn't able to find a foothold in a new social group. And then because of that kind of compounded. And I felt like, over time developed the idea of myself as someone who just like wasn't really able to do that, which I think was partially supported by reality, and partially is just the reality created by ideas that you have about yourself. Because I think of myself now as a pretty, like, an introverted person and someone who really enjoys and relies on alone time, but who really likes other people. But I feel like I've had to, like, train myself in adulthood to not fear other human beings in a basic way, the way that some people do with, like, dogs or crowds.
Oh, I totally get that. Was the move that you're talking about when you moved to Hawaii? And how old were you when you guys moved?
8.
I've taught, there's a few people I can think of that grew up in Hawaii, and they describe it as like, and I know you sort of alluded to this, but like a very tough place to grow up.
I mean, it was for me, and I feel like it's hard to know how much to ascribe to which factors, because I think in retrospect also my parents were really struggling more during those years than I really, like, it really took reaching adulthood and being like, oh, like, this is what it looks like for two adults to be struggling.
Are you talking about like financial struggling or struggling with each other?
Just with each other, emotionally, with mental health, you know, with just kind of being in the kind of place that you need to, having the kind of stability that you need in adult life to, you know, to not be kind of starting over each day, trying to climb various hills. Like, we were always doing perfectly well financially. And then I think that also has the effect of making other problems feel less visible, which is good in many ways and bad in many ways. But yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know when the optimal age is to move to a different place as a kid, but it's funny. I, at the time, always thought of it as me having a big kind of shock from the degree of change. And it's really only recently that I've also thought of having parents who were really, like, pretty set in their ways. And, like, I think, if not thrilled with the life that they were moving away from, at least, like, they really knew how it worked and they'd been doing it for a long time. And then to be in really, you know, like, for most of what they knew to be kind of radically different.
What prompted the move?
A job offer. And just also the idea of, like, I think this is part of why, for not anymore, but for many years, I was very suspicious of vacation-y places, because I was like, people go to these vacation-y places and they think everything will be fine, but it won't.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Orange County, California, in a place that is not nearly as, like, vacation-y, you know.
But isn't that where Disneyland is? Is that in Orange County?
Yeah, it is. It's in Anaheim. I grew up in, like, Corona Del Mar, Newport Beach, which was like half an hour away. Disneyland was, you know, one of the happiest places of my childhood. But it is, I mean, so I was born in Oakland, California, and it started getting rough. And so my parents left, and I think that they moved to Orange County, California, to the town we moved to, because it was like, it, on the face of it, looks so idyllic. Like, it's, the streets are, it's safety was the number one thing. So, like, it's safe and it's clean and there's nice schools and there's blah, 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 blah. But it's, like, also, very homogenous and very conservative, and just, as an adult now, I know I'm jumping around, but, like, as an adult, I do understand what about it appealed to them. Yeah. But as, you know, for years and years and years, I was always like, why did you decide to raise us in this godforsaken, awful place? Because I just felt like this is, we don't fit into this place at all.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And there is, like, I think maybe kids are more aware of how a location can be aspirational in that way. I have the only time I've been to that area, to me, the context of this is very funny. I was on an Oxygen true crime show that will remain nameless, and I was staying in a hotel, like, right by Disneyland, which it later turned out was because they were doing an interview for a different episode with a DA somewhere in Orange County who was like, I refuse to be interviewed unless you come to me. And they were like, all right. And so they set up in Anaheim. And I remember just kind of driving around because at the time I would acquaint myself with a place by going to a bunch of nurseries. So kind of driving around town, going to nurseries and thinking like, this is a really funny concept. It feels like the idea of the all-American small town kind of built in Southern California in a way that felt to me as an adult who had no baggage about it, like very sweet and very weird.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Orange County, when you say nurseries, do you mean plant nurseries?
Yes. Yeah. No,
I
not
love
looking
that.
for babies to, I don't know. No.
to soak
To
up the
look
vibe
at?
of.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So Orange County is actually very big. And it's Orange County itself. I was misspeaking when I said Orange County is homogenous because there's actually a lot of different parts of Orange County and it kind of runs the gamut.
But not the parts in the TV show. So you can see how people would be confused.
Sorry, say it again.
Oh, but not the parts in the OC. So you could see how people would be confused.
I grew up in like the OC, the TV show, that's like the area that I grew up. So like the beach part of it. So that is all homogenous and like manicured. I mean, that's a little more highfalutin than where I was, but that's the vibe of what it was. Yeah. But there are parts of Orange County. You know what? This is not a podcast about Orange County, even though it's turning into it. So, okay. So you're in Hawaii.
Almost did it.
How I'm wondering sort of take me through the path of like how you got from being that kid in Hawaii to your interest in journalism and media and cultural criticism and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, this feels like a weird series of dominoes, and I've been reflecting on this lately. But basically, I finished high school. I loved writing the whole way through. There was a very brief period when I was in like kindergarten or something where I saw something on PBS about people who go down to the bottom of the ocean in submersibles. So aside from wanting to be a writer, there was a brief period when I wanted to go to the bottom of the ocean in submersibles and see all the weird stuff that lives down there. And that was my only other aspiration, but I ditched that pretty quickly and just really loved writing and did it as much as I could. And one of the main outlets that I had growing up, especially as a teen, was fan fiction. I wrote so much fan fiction on fanfiction.net. I don't even know if that website still exists. For a while, the big fan fiction website was Wattpad, and now I feel like it's Archive of Our Own, but maybe there's some other thing where it is now. But in 2003, it was fanfiction.net.
I mean, what kind of fan fiction? That's so many questions.
Yeah. I mean, a few different kinds of fan fiction, but I really flourished writing Newsies fan fiction. I did that for years. And it was such a good community. It's funny to me that at the time I was this teenager who was very motivated to write. If you had, given me an assignment to do some kind of creative writing that wasn't an essay or a book report, like I would have just torn it up. But there just wasn't a lot of outlet for that. I think writing is something that's so utilitarian in the way teaching works that maybe it doesn't get seen necessarily as a discrete activity when teenagers do it. At least I felt like that at the time. And so, yeah, so much Newsies fan fiction. And it was like, and it was stuff like, interestingly, we wrote about practically everything except the strike, because I guess the movie covered that. And we were like, okay, that's enough. It's enough union stuff. We don't know about how unions work. So what if the Newsies came to a contemporary high school in Arizona? What would they all be like? Who would be a skater? You could think about that for a whole day.
I love it. I don't know if you ever watched the show Facts of Life, but I never wrote, this was like my favorite show, and I never wrote Facts of Life fan fiction or anything like that. But a pastime of mine often was like thinking about, the four main girls and then thinking like, what really is the relationship between Blair and Tootie? And in my head, I would just like do it almost like a chemistry test. Like I would just think of like the two of them are together. How did they get along? The two of them. And I would just pair up the different ones. Like playing with dolls, but in my head, and it's the facts of life, girls. Okay, so you're doing Newsies fan fiction, and then I assume you go to college at some point. And where did you go?
I go to college at some point. I went to Bennington for a while, which was really fun, and then I lacked the motivation to really know what I was doing there anymore. Is how I remember it.
Mm-hmm.
I did theater there. I have not done theater since. I always felt like there's like this secret little pilot light of theater somewhere inside of me, and like who knows when it will,
blow up,
burn the house down.
When it will explode.
It could happen at any time. Everyone is at risk. And and then I went to Portland State. I went back to Portland, my hometown, and kind of stuck close to home. I think I felt like I had been burned by my initial experience of trying to go far away and have the Felicity at college experience. I was like, that was too much new stuff. I'm going to do medium new stuff. Which unfortunately is my response to new stuff. I don't think that's ideal. But that's how I manage change. And so I graduated college in 2010, which was like, I remember as being like pretty in the thick of the Great Recession. It was when we were still like, this is a relatively new phenomenon. Maybe it won't last forever. Like that was cute. Not that it lasted forever, but it did define a generation. And so obviously I decided to stay in school and got an MFA in fiction. And then in the process of doing an MFA in fiction, I started writing nonfiction for the first time, kind of because that was what I was able to publish. I could write little kind of short nonfiction pieces, and that was what I was figuring out how to publish online. I was also publishing poetry at the time. Like, I honestly, when I was 22, all I wanted was to have bylines. I was just like, I was dying of starvation, and the only thing that could keep me alive was bylines. And so I started writing kind of nonfiction little humor pieces. This was the heyday of the Awl and the Hairpin. And I think because fiction was so stressful an enterprise, if I focused on it full time, nonfiction became enticing because of that. And I started really enjoying. And then, of course, I had always written essays. I did a master's in literature at the same time.
Where did you get your advanced degrees?
I was at PSU for years and years. I was there for college and my other degrees, and then I taught there for a couple years after that. I felt like it was like one of those relationships where like you stay too long and then you finally have to like leave yourself because they're not going to ask you to leave.
Right. So very comfortable.
Yeah, I really grew up there. And so doing a master's degree, like you write and read a lot of academic writing. And I think what I liked about that was that it kind of, in a sort of unintentional way, I think put me through schooling for trying to write essays, which I think is really what I do in nonfiction more than anything when I do it. Because, I was doing facts and also this concept of, what does it mean to try and have this relationship with this concept of a person who we only have through their writings? Like, what are we doing here? The kind of metatextual stuff of not just learning history, but talking about the pursuit of trying to call something history at all. And then doing that at the same time as short fiction, which is like really so focused on the sentence. Like normally just like hardly anything happens in short stories. Some short stories are action packed, but like not that many that I read. So they're really relying on the sentence to get you through the whole thing. So I feel like doing those things at once, was kind of this like Lego degree in the essay.
So, and were you always drawn to pop culture?
Yeah, I really was. I think a lot about how I grew up watching like VH1 countdowns and Biography and the kind of the cable TV channels that had started to appear in the late 90s, which I feel like was the point when TV started to be about itself in a really robust way. Does that make sense?
I think I understand what you mean. But say more about that.
I feel like there was just like a lot of media on media at that
like
time.
clip shows.
Yeah, like clip shows and countdowns and like E! True Hollywood Story, which like obviously I watched a ton of.
Right, like a lot of revisiting of things.
Yes.
Like a lot of cataloging,
right, like there's enough
indexing.
TV that's existed that where TV is now going to be about TV.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And that was such a flourishing thing. And I don't know, I was just thinking today, for some reason, I was thinking about how, I know why. It was because I was driving and I looked over and I kind of glimpsed something that my brain after the fact was like, maybe that was a person. And then I was like, I don't think that might not have been a person. Because sometimes I'll just see like a trash can out of the corner of my eye for a split second. And my brain backfills it as a person. Then I look over and it's a trash can. And I was like, I bet that wasn't a person. I bet that was one of those trash can people. And then I was like, it's too bad I can't roll it back. Like, what if I could just roll the tape back and see what was actually there?
This is like, so I mentioned to you the segment that I do, Just Me or Everyone. This is one of my Just Me or Everyone's. If I'm behind, I've definitely been in a car and wanted to rewind. Because it's like I'm behind a glass. It feels like I'm behind a screen, and it's made me realize how used to having the ability to rewatch something I am. Similarly,
I didn't think of that.
This is actually not similarly, but this something made me think of it. Oftentimes, if I'm in like a movie theater, which I'm never in anymore, but if I'm in a seat, I'll like reach for my seatbelt. I guess it's tangentially related because it's like the car, the relationship between the car and the movie theater experience.
Totally.
Anyway, though, yes, I totally have that thing, and then I think, what's happening to the way I'm mediating reality?
Yeah. And I mean, what that made me think of in the moment was how, because something I've thought about a lot with regards to the satanic panic is that we have the whole phenomenon is bolstered partly by the fact that there's, these beliefs in psychology at the time that repressed memories are these memories that specifically that our brains are like, you can't deal with this thing that's happening to you. You're too young. So we're going to put this in the deep freeze and take it out, and it'll be in mint condition because it'll have never been touched. And and unfortunately, memory doesn't appear to work that way. It seems like, if you don't think about something or don't think about something with some effort, whether it's conscious or not, for many years, then like it doesn't stay in great condition because you haven't looked at it in a really long time. It's harder to access. You can't run the tape back. Like you should be able to, because justice would be so much more in reach if you could, but you can't. And so there's so much rhetoric in these repressed memory texts that are supporting the idea that memory is easier to obtain a factual copy of many, many years after the fact. Or there's often this metaphor that they return to of like, your memory is like a videotape. And like VCRs are kind of new technology at the time. And I imagine people are, I don't know, just that there's something about being able to see things over and over that maybe makes us able to believe that we might function like a videotape. But we don't. It really sucks.
I have often wondered, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but let's say you're in a room and there is a conversation happening within your earshot, but you're not paying attention to it. Is it still being recorded in your memory? Like, if we could somehow access your memory of being in that room, would it be there? Or is it like, if you're not paying attention to it, you're not recording it?
I have no idea. I mean, I my guess is that it would depend, because I think that we're usually taking in more information than we necessarily realize.
Right.
And we could even be recording stuff and not noticing that we're recording it to memory. See, and there I'm using a VCR metaphor. Although I guess it existed before VCRs existed. But so I think it would depend on whether you had any consciousness of it at all. Like, I think if you truly like never engaged with that or noticed it, then like it's probably inaccessible. And I think that like, I mean, a lot of what even is said directly to us, we can't get back to. after
Yeah.
not that long. Like, I think one of the weird things about adulthood is that kids have amazing memories because they depend on them to survive. And because they're new, presumably. And I think that we, like, as we get older, we continue to want to believe that our memories are capable of the feats they were when we were younger. But they're just not, they're not that good.
No, and that is a real bummer because I'm someone who I've always had a really good memory. So I don't know. I feel like within the last 10 years is when I started thinking like, oh, my memory is much more fallible than I want to think of it as. And it feels like the way I think of it is like a big bookshelf. And like I go to pull out the book and instead like I accidentally pull out 3 of the wrong books or something, like I'll just say a name and it's the wrong name. And then also, and I imagine you've had this experience as someone who's had a podcast for a long time. Mm-hmm. I was recently telling a story about a conversation that I'd had with a podcast guest. And I told the story about it being an off mic exchange. And that like a lot of people heard though. And then a listener wrote in and she's like, actually that happened on air and you had like a really funny response. And I was like, the reality of it was so much better than how I just retold it, but it was totally different. So that makes me an unreliable narrator of my own life. So there you go.
And I think there's an episode of the podcast Heavyweight that I think is amazing where they investigate whether Rob Corddry actually broke his arm as a child because he broke his arm, but no one in his family remembers him having a broken arm.
Oh my God.
I won't tell you how it ends, but that's incredible. And like, that's the kind of thing that happens. And yet also, and to make it more paradoxical, like we are capable of remembering things incredibly well with incredible detail. And it's just that we're also capable of not remembering what happened on our own show. I mean, I have the experience on Twitter fairly often if somebody will be like, Sarah said, this on an episode of You're Wrong About, and then there'll be a quote and I'll be like, wow, that's pretty smart. I don't remember saying that. I don't know when I said it. I don't know what it was about, but like, good job.
Yeah. It's like the idea you have of yourself is actually, it's worse than the you that other people are remembering for you.
Always.
Let's take a quick break. And then I want to find out how you started You're Wrong About. I want to tell you guys about HelloFresh. They are a meal kit delivery service. So you get farm fresh, pre-portioned. I put an extra It's just pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. So Elliot, my son, wants to be a baker when he grows up, and he's decided he's going to be a baker when he grows up. And my littlest one, Owen, is going to be a chef. And Elliot told me today they're going to work in a restaurant together, and it's going to be called, are you ready for this incredible name, Bakers and Chefs? But anyway, Elliot is all about cooking and specifically baking. That's where he's specialized in baking, but he wants to help out in the kitchen and cook a ton whenever I'm doing anything in there. And we had a HelloFresh shipment recently, and we received the ingredients to make shepherd's pie, and he helped me. And it was such a fun experience to have together. And it was, it's real cooking. It's not like you're just, I don't know why I feel like it's clear. What I was going to say is it's not like, you're putting them in the microwave. Like it's all the steps involved in cooking, but so much of the prep work and the guesswork and all that is taken out of it. So it's really like you're your own, trying to think of which cooking person to mention. Emerald. You're your own Emerald. You're your own Rachel Ray, And it was so delicious. And then I think tonight we're going to make hibachi sweet soy steak and shrimp. So and by the way, you can like customize what kind of recipes you want. So HelloFresh offers 50 menu and market items to choose from every week, including veggie, calorie smart, family friendly, etc. And the new year is a great time to focus on what's most important to you, whether it's saving money by ordering less takeout, learning to cook, or prioritizing your wellness. HelloFresh is here to help with endless options to make cooking at home simple and enjoyable. Go to HelloFresh.com/Allison16 and use code Allison16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. Again, that's HelloFresh.com/Allison16 and use code Allison16 for 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. I also want to talk to you guys about BetterHelp. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy. You've heard me talk about therapy and how much I feel that therapy has helped me. Oh, I can't imagine where I'd be without therapy. Actually, I know where I'd be without therapy. I'd probably pretty much be the person that I was 20 years ago. And no one wants that. This is an uncomfortable pause. It's just dawning on me how much therapy has, it both helps me to feel better and it's just helped me to grow in all sorts of areas of my life. That's really a story for another day. I want to talk about BetterHelp. Look, there's stigmas around therapy. People think that you should wait until things are unbearable to go to therapy. But that's not true. Therapy is a tool to utilize before things get worse, and it can help you avoid those lows. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist. You don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can be matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. Allison Rosen is your new best friend. Listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/bestfriend. So 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, BetterHelp.com/bestfriend. Okay, we're back. So tell me, how did your wrong about start?
So this is a nice story. I had, to tell the full story, I published an article about Tanya Harding in 2014, January 2014, which helps us with our domino journey from my childhood to now, where I was in grad school. I was publishing short things. That Tanya Harding piece was the first significant size piece of nonfiction that I ever published, and kind of set the tone for the work that I was publishing in the years after that. And unbeknownst to me at the time, it was read by a guy named Michael Hobbes, who reconnected with me. Gosh, actually only 2 years later. It feels like many, many years passed between me publishing that article and us first being in touch, but it was like 2.5 years. And initially just we got in touch and we're talking as fellow journalists. I think he was recommending that I pitch something to the Huffington Post where he was working at the time. And I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. I would really like to just like have a reason to continue emailing with this person. But just nothing ever quite fit. And so he came to me in, I think, January or February of 2018 with this idea of doing a podcast called, I think the initial title ideas were Second Draft or I Misremember the 90s, about pop culture stories that we had gotten wrong in the 90s. And I was like, I love this idea, but I would really want to do an episode on Leopold and Loeb. So can we not have the 90s baked into the concept? Because I want to do at least one episode on the 1920s. And then, of course, like 4 years later, I've never done a Leopold and Loeb episode yet. And so we started, we made a couple demo episodes and kept going. And then initially had a plan to pitch it to the Huffington Post as something that they would pick up. They declined. And so we started putting it out independently and just kept going with it because it was fun, basically. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And your Tanya Harding story, what was the thesis, if you will, of that?
I mean, the through line of that, there's first of all the actual argument of like, what is the actual evidence that Tanya Harding not even masterminded the assault on Nancy Kerrigan, but had anything to do with it, and laying out what, was known to science at that time. And then B, I think the bigger mission and what, remains important to me is something that I attempted. And according to some readers who I've heard back from, I was successful at, was just being like, who is this person? What is the story? What was her life prior to this moment when she was thrust into the public eye? How had the institution of skating treated her? What is skating? How does it treat women historically?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to be a figure skater? What kind of control does its governing body or its governing bodies have over you and your body potentially? Just kind of getting deep into it, and also, trying to tell the whole story and the life story of both Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan, so that if you get to the end, you can think potentially, I don't know what I think about guilt or innocence in this case, but this was definitely a story where the media sold the public a story where someone young and victimized and suffering was seen as a brilliant mastermind who deserved nothing but scorn and fury. And we were all complacent in that moment. And why and what for?
Did you see I, Tanya?
I did. Yeah.
What'd you think of it?
I really like it. I mean, I've talked, and there's a Tanya Harding episode of You're Wrong About where I talk about things that I personally would have handled differently. Like, I think specifically it makes the question of abuse feel a little bit too comfortable for me, because the things that she alleges that her husband did to her, even if you do this kind of he said, she said version, which this movie does, you would get into a more uncomfortable place that I think, like, I would have wanted the movie to be 20 to 30% more uncomfortable. But I also recognize that there's only a certain level of discomfort that you can reach and meet certain distribution goals. That's what I imagine is the situation there. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they wanted to not make an uncomfortable movie. Like, I guess not everyone sets out to be uncomfortable. It's weird of them, but yeah, fine.
Wait, what's the discomfort more specifically that you feel like they didn't include?
I mean, I think that it always stays in kind of a funny place where she retains agency. She's able to kind of tell people off. We don't, I don't think that we need to see a ton of abuse in movies to believe that someone is alleging it. But I think that the movie doesn't really depict the kind of control and the kind of fear of Jeff that she says that she lived in, which I see no reason to disbelieve.
Right.
And just, this, to me, this is kind of a nerdy thing to take issue with, but I do think that it relates to kind of something deeper, which is that there's a scene in the movie where the judges have scored her low based on, I think, her costume, and she kind of yells at them and says, "Suck my dick," which is really fun to watch. That's very cathartic. I love it. I love watching Margot Robbie yell "suck my dick" at someone, on a purely scene level, A+ from me. But also I feel like, to me, one of the things that feels so relevant about what figure skating was is that the rules of performance were so suffocating that I think no one would have ever considered speaking to a judge from the ice. I've never heard of a skater doing that. It seems like the kind of thing that in a sport so obsessed with etiquette would potentially be so ruinous to you that I can't imagine someone even considering doing that, which again is it's less fun to watch.
I know what you mean, though.
Yeah,
I know what you mean. When you are mired, and I don't mean that, when you're up on all the details, something like that feels like a big departure.
Yeah, and just, I think that I have my personal ideas about what made the situation seem so awful to me, and so I'm highly invested in a work depicting that. But I feel like that movie evangelized for someone who I care about a lot and whose legacy I care about a lot. And I feel like I've frequently seen people watching I, Tanya on airplanes. That makes me really happy.
Have you ever talked to her, the actual Tanya Harding?
I never have. Someday I wish to. But yeah, it's my attempts have been foiled so far. And also I don't want to try so hard that it becomes adversarial. That's like against the spirit of the thing.
Mm-hmm. So You're Wrong About is very popular. And you guys do it independently. How did you how did you start getting the word out about it? How did people start discovering it?
I mean, I don't know the mechanics of it. I feel like when Mike and I got started, we were both spending roughly 23 hours a day on Twitter, and I'm sure that helped to some extent. Like, I feel like Twitter is sort of like a necessary evil if you're working in media for that reason, unfortunately. And I think we definitely had early listeners who were also, had some kind of platform on Twitter and could share it that way. Like, that's my best understanding of how it got started. And I think the ball started rolling relatively slowly. And I think it was probably kind of a cult, well, like getting known for the first few months, then maybe kind of a cult hit for the first year and a half of its existence. And then I think like what the thing I feel most weird about, and I guess good about in the end, is that I feel like it really became a popular show after we started having a pandemic. And Mike and I responded at the time by being like, all right, work is the only thing that feels normal anymore. Let's make 1 million of these.
Mm-hmm. Did you guys up the frequency in the pandemic?
We did. Yeah. We were doing 2 episodes a week, I think, for a big chunk there, which is, was not a sustainable pace, but I think there was a period where it was just like the only, to me at least, the only thing that felt good.
Mm-hmm. So at some point late last year, Michael decided he was leaving, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But why?
I mean, it's funny. We initially had this conversation where we were both like, I think we pushed this too hard during the pandemic and we both feel burned out on it. And then I sat back and thought about it for a while. And I was like, all the goals that I have for what I want to do next, because I still want to do podcasts. I want to talk to people. I want to learn things. I want to have people explain that to me. Like it feels like it makes sense to just keep doing the show and let it change to meet those needs that I have that I would be otherwise just starting over with a new show in order to do. And so that's, how I reached what I'm doing now, which is still being in the explainer seat, but not half the time, which was, roughly the breakdown, or at least the concept of Mike and Sarah's You're Wrong About, and now to be on the receiving end of information more often. But I think it was just like the show had to be reborn in some way, because I think I think something dangerous happens when you feel comfortable that you kind of know how to do something without thinking too hard about it. At that point, something maybe has to change.
In order to keep it interesting for yourself,
yeah,
you mean?
I think, for yourself. And like, I assume for the listener as well. I think things fall into a rut relatively easily. I don't know. But then, I mean, really, I guess everything has to do on whether you can feel someone's heart being in it. And I think like my feeling would, because like, I grew up watching sitcoms. We've already established this. I feel like you can hear in long-running podcasts the same thing that happens in sitcoms, where like you can hear people's hearts stop being in it. And it's such a bummer.
And you feel like you were hearing that with your co-host, potentially.
I think that we were both hearing that in ourselves. And we kind of, both became like took a running jump at it and admitted that to each other. And then for me, the solution was, I mean, I think that, he was already had already been working on maintenance phase for some time. And that's where his energy is going now. And I think that I'm, kind of doing something similar with this, which is to continue doing not the same thing, but something where there's a similar or a built off of the original, but a new set of challenges ahead. And there's, different things that I want to do with subject matter, because now that it's more a guest oriented format, there's just that opens up more to talk about. For one thing, my brain can only understand so much from an explainer perspective.
Right. Do you feel there's more responsibility on your shoulders now?
Yeah, for sure. Because being part of a duo, like I've always really enjoyed, I don't think Mike ever really embraced this because he doesn't really have a clear mental image of who these people are, I assume. But I always enjoyed thinking of us as something like Martin and Lewis, where you just, like, among other things, you just become like a single substance, you know? And so to be my own substance is like, yeah, there is kind of some magical thinking to that duo feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I've been podcasting for a long time, and and personnel changes freak audiences out.
Yeah.
And I get it too. I totally get, like, I am used to this relationship and I don't want to go through growing pains.
Right.
And I have been, I've been on all sides of it. I've been freaked out, like, what happens now? And then and this is really like me revealing too much of my own thought process, but maybe I can share something with you, which you probably don't even need to hear this. But at the same time, I look at it myself like, well, you know what? This whole situation is forcing me personally to become a stronger podcaster on my own and the people who are here are here because they like what I am offering. And I'm more fully, like, stepping into that role of, like, just me. Not that I'm, you know what I'm saying? I feel like I've said too much.
Can't give all the secrets away, but yeah, totally. And I feel like I have so many experiences where I'm like, oh, God damn it, I'm growing and learning. This is terrible. Again.
Yes, I know what you mean. Gosh, there's so much stuff. Okay, I'm just going to list the things that I want to get to. So I'm on Patreon. We have some questions from Patreon listeners. I know you have a lot of thoughts about and just like that, which I would love to hear because I also have thoughts about that. And then we have just mirror everyone. We have, hey, go fuck yourself. Okay. Yeah. How are you feeling about this Sex and the City reboot?
Oh my God. I have so many feelings. I feel like it's like, it's so funny to me that all anyone does all year long is recommend obviously amazing shows that I'm sure I would like. Like, first, everyone was talking about Succession, and now, like, some of my closest friends are watching Succession and bothering me about Succession. And the more people tell me how great Succession is, the more I feel the need to avoid watching Succession. I don't know why. I don't know. And with so much other stuff too. And then the Sex and the City reboot comes out, and obviously, if you have any history with something, it's easier to be invested. And I have been watching Sex and the City since it was on, I think, UPN on late night reruns in 2004. And it's like, I've watched most of the episodes multiple times. I think it's terrible. It's all I can talk about. Like, I'm so invested in this terrible, wonderful show.
Yeah. I felt like the most recent one what got the closest to, like, the feeling of the old show. I think because of, like, the inane puns, they've gotten back into the puns and the wordplay and stuff, which that really was the fifth girl. Step out of the way, New York. It was the wordplay.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's just a real mess, and yet I do like to watch it.
Yeah. I was actually watching part of an episode right before we started this conversation. And I was thinking, like, it's kind of cool and sad and cool to think that in today's TV landscape, we might just keep checking in on our favorite characters across formats for decades. Never
we never have to say goodbye.
Right. We never have to say goodbye. We just keep having kind of diminished returns until it's truly impossible to do another project. But, like, yeah, I think the funniest thing, and then this did send me down a rabbit hole of watching the original show and kind of watching it from the beginning, watching the format change. And it's so funny to me to think about how much it's changed from what it originally was, which was like this episodic show where every episode had a sexual thesis.
Right. Yeah. Well, that first season, to me, like, it was really not very compelling.
Yeah.
And then when
awkward.
they changed, right. But see, okay, so I feel like we should just, we're gonna, am I spoiling? I don't think this is even a spoiler, really.
Spoil-a-thon, yeah.
Yeah, this is not really a spoiler, but the idea that Carrie isn't sexually explicit enough in her discussion on the podcast, and her podcast boss is telling her she has to step her pussy up. Remember how many times she said that in that first episode?
Didn't like that. Yeah.
But it's hard to believe that she would be so prudish, right? Because she never was.
And here's like another central paradox of the show, which I find fascinating, which is that, okay, first season didn't really land. They changed it a lot. They got rid of Skipper. They were like, let's move away from this like man on the street. What is the sex? What is the city approach? And make it really like a soap opera about these four women and their fun, like, sex adventures and increasingly their relationships with guys like Steve. And, oh my God, oh yeah. And so what's funny is that it starts off making sense that Carrie's a columnist because she's like going to bars and she's asking people questions and interviewing like the guy who has sex with models. And then from like the third season on, I would say it just becomes this weird, unacknowledged enigma where it's like, are Carrie's columns literally just her describing her friends' sex lives? And if so, how is this affecting them? And it's never addressed.
Yeah.
It's so confusing. Is this in the column? Is Miranda and Steve's relationship something that New Yorkers are reading about for 4 years?
That's such a good point. You're right.
I don't know.
Carrie's the bad art friend.
That's the only conclusion we can emerge with. Yeah.
So I went to a book signing of Candace Bushnell's many years ago. And in the book, she wrote, her inscription was, "Dear Allison, watch out for the modelizers, Candace Bushnell." I bring it up because you said the guy who only slept with models, and that was the name, the modelizers.
Episode 2, baby.
Okay, how do you feel about how awkward all these white women are in trying to like be quote unquote woke? Because even though it is so cringeworthy to watch, I think there's a part of me that likes this side of it, because I think, and I'm just thinking on the fly here, so I'm at risk of saying something that I wish I hadn't, putting my foot in my mouth, but let me see if I can articulate this. There's this idea of like the way to be an enlightened ally is just follow these 4 steps and just act this way and just be this way and stuff. And I feel like actually oftentimes that leads to awkwardness. And it's really like the way to be a good, decent, enlightened person is it's situational, and it's to listen to other people, and it's not just to have these rules like I always act this way or I always say this thing. I am part of this Facebook moms group that on my podcast Upwardly Weekly, my co-host refers to as the sanctimonious moms of LA. I look at it like a car crash. Like it is the most ridiculous group that is trying so hard to be so enlightened that mostly it's just like a whole bunch of people correcting each other all the time. But I guess what am I trying to say? Because I'm all over the place. What I'm trying to say is, yeah, it's sort of interesting. Even though it's cringeworthy, it's interesting to watch these women be so just awkward and shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, and it's like I mean, I think something that makes it funny to compare to the original show is that like one of the aspects of performative allyship that I think feels specifically gross when you see it today or when you think you see it is when you feel like, well, you're just doing this because it's what you have to do now. Like this is in fashion now. And I feel like the original Sex and the City was always about kind of what's in fashion. This question of like, what's the new restaurant that everyone's going to?
Right.
What's the new club? Everyone in New York wants to be in denial. And doing stuff because, you know, I think, well, to zoom out, like to another big thought I've been having and try and connect all of this. I was talking to a friend the other day about growing up with the original Sex and the City, because I've been reflecting on this a lot lately and why I'm so invested in this weird reboot. And one of the things that occurred to me that has never occurred to me before, because it's so not part of the picture, is that like this takes place in an entirely safe New York City. Like, especially early on, Charlotte has all these boyfriends who are defined by wanting to do a sex thing that she doesn't want to do. And she's always like, just kind of shakes her little head and they're like, all right, you know, and everyone's just kind of doing whatever they want sexually. And never is there the concept that any of the men that they're having sex with, any of the situations they're in could become dangerous or traumatic. Or like difficult more than just being like annoying.
Right.
Like, oh no, I thought I could have sex with this really old guy, but then I saw his butt and I ran away and I kept the jewelry, the end. Like everything is a caper. And I think there's something that I find so lovely and also divorced from reality about that. Like not reality as we always live it, but the reality of our lives as defined by anxiety, and anxiety that is founded on something very real.
Yes. Do you find it believable that they would be so clumsy and out of touch?
Yeah. To get back to your actual question. I mean, yeah, I do. And I guess I feel like it's interesting to me that this is so much the focus. And I feel like maybe their clumsiness is an attempt to even the balance sheet, because there's also this really odd wish fulfillment for the characters where like everyone gets her own woman of color to befriend. Like that feels really weird, right?
Oh, I hadn't thought of it that way, but yes.
Because Charlotte gets the other mom at her children's school.
Yes. Miranda
Carrie gets her realtor, Seema.
Yes.
And Miranda gets her professor.
Nia Wallace. Don't you know that's Nia Wallace? Let her in. Even though she doesn't have her ID. Yeah. Oh wow, I hadn't thought about how they each get their own friend.
Right.
That's weird. Yeah.
I mean, I know that I'm saying that in a way that makes it sound as gross as possible, but like they do though.
No, but yeah. I hadn't thought about that. I wasn't thinking of Carrie and Seema. I was thinking of Carrie and Mario Cantone as like the new duo, but you're right.
Well, I also love how Mario Cantone shows up like sitting with them, because it keeps feeling like I want there to be some like an announcement before the show starts of like, ladies and gentlemen, the role of Samantha Jones is being played by Mario Cantone.
Right. Totally. Yeah. I mean, I feel like they have really taken it'd be like if we were to revisit Friends and it's like now they're constantly talking about how they afford their apartment and also they have have new diverse friends too. Like I feel like they internalized all the knocks against the original version, and so they're going to sort of incorporate those notes, but in like a winking way. So
yeah, it's like I'm just glad that anything Sex and the City is happening. Like I was in the theater, I saw to see Sex and the City 2 twice. I did not think it was good. I was still there.
Is that the one where they go to
Abu Dhabi?
Dubai? Abu Dhabi? Okay. Yes, I saw that one in the theater as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I almost feel like the thing of everyone having a counterpart, I feel like the show is saying like, we shouldn't even be making this show. We should be making a show about 4 completely different people. And it's like, well, yeah, I don't disagree. Like you could do both, you know?
Yes, you're right. It's like, yeah, it's got such I'm sorry energy to it.
Yeah, they should do like Sex in the City, Tuo, Gen Z. That's what I want. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Oh, didn't they do a prequel though?
Oh, they did. Well, oh yeah, they did. But here's the thing. I think the casting of Carrie Bradshaw was, and I realize this is an intense thing to say, but I mean it. It was anti-Semitic casting. Thank you. If you look at a picture of teen Sarah Jessica Parker, she looks like Sarah Jessica Parker, you know?
Right. And they chose like a very Serena van der Woodsen actress.
Exactly. Yeah. We need like quirky little square pegs Carrie running around downtown.
Yeah. You're right. Now I'm angry about that. Although I never watched it. I just remember seeing trailers for the prequel. Okay, let's take some questions that people sent in on Patreon. I'm on Patreon, patreon.com/AllisonRosen. Episodes of my bonus podcast, The Friend Zone. There's a level where you can text me and I'll text you back. You can watch videos of the Thursday show. This video will be on YouTube, youtube.com/AllisonRosen. But you get Thursday show videos, Zoom parties, so much stuff. If you sign up for an annual subscription, you get 2 months free. So 12 months for the price of 10. Okay.
When we ask this, send them in. They're wondering how you have been. So thanks so much for answering these questions from our fans.
Lynn Moynihan says, what are some episode topics you've really wanted to cover but haven't yet or can't?
I've always wanted to do a Jack the Ripper episode and have felt intimidated by just the level of research I feel like it would require to make that worth it. I feel like all my answers are going to fall along those lines pretty much. Ditto for Titanic. I was just making a list today and thinking of maybe doing that this April. So some like farther back in history stuff. Also Leopold and Loeb. I feel like something that happened in the 80s or 90s, I have kind of an actual research base about, and I can kind of build off of that. And then if I'm going to a part of history that feels more distant, where I have to get kind of, you know, just oriented in the time period before I can talk about something happening in it, that feels like a bigger a much bigger undertaking, but I'm excited to try to do some of the bigger things.
Can you do all of it from your home computer? Or is there microfiche involved sometimes? Is microfiche even a thing anymore?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I have never used it, but I've always wanted to. It's such a horror movie thing to do. You're like,
right.
Look at everything I found on this microfiche about the haunted house where I live. Well, I remember when I was researching the Tammy Faye Baker and Jessica Hahn episode, there was this Jessica Hahn interview in Playboy that I wanted to read, and Playboy didn't have it accessible online. There's like less digitization of Playboy than of other magazines, shockingly. And so I was living in Las Vegas at the time, and I did not have time to like order a copy on eBay and get it in like 10 days. I needed it like that week. And so I was like, all right, I am going to a bunch of antique stores and flea markets, and I will find this episode of Playboy. And I did. And I love when that happens.
So would you just go in and be like, hi, I'd like all your old Playboys, please?
Well, I remember I found it in this antiques mall where it was like, you know, just a bunch of different little areas where people were selling their wares. And so I just went through them and stopped at the places that had periodicals, because Playboys, you know, have a pretty decent resale value if you have one in good quality. So they turn up. I had been antiquing enough that I was like, that Playboy is out there.
That's cool. Have you ever done anything on, and I bet people, it's like a doctor being at a party and someone's like, could you look at my mole? I bet people all the time are like, have you ever done anything on? But just two things that popped up in my head as like these things that I'm still like, what the hell was going on there? Yeah. Go Ask Alice.
Ooh.
And Flowers in the Attic.
Oh, wow.
Have you touched on those at all in episodes?
That's such a great, yes. That's much better than the mole question, because I don't have to look at a mole. So I almost did a Go Ask Alice episode last year, and I don't know why I didn't. I think I wanted to do like a fake memoir spectacular one, and then I recorded part of it and wasn't happy with it and then didn't go back to it. But I think a Go Ask Alice episode by itself would be great, because I have a copy of that that I remember reading for the time, and it was like, the writing in that book is incredible.
I need to reread it because it was like passed around like contraband when I was like 12 or something. And I remember then writing in my own journal and being like, I am writing, like her manner of speaking has like bled into me. And now I'm like, I don't even want to be sounding like her. But I remember writing in my diary, like, I feel like I sound like the, Go Ask Alice because I just read it. But like later I read sort of a synopsis and I was like, I need to reread this because I think I missed a lot of what was going on.
You got to reread it. Yeah. I had read part of it in 5th grade and I didn't finish it because I had a short attention span and I liked dragons. But I think I skipped to the end and read what happened and then threw it aside for the dragons. But I remember what seemed so freaky to me about it. I totally believed it was real.
Yeah.
And I was shocked when I found out later on that it was written, I think, by a concerned Mormon woman who wrote a bunch of fake teen diaries to show that, doing a drug will destroy your life forever. But I remember the way that she died in the story, it was this real journal by this real girl. And she went down this horrible, dark path from doing drugs. She smoked I think actually she started by doing LSD and then she smoked weed. And then she ran away and she was living on the streets and things were really rough. And then she came back home and she was, getting used to so much stuff happened in this book. She was reacclimating to living with her family. It was this really rough road. She was really recovering. And then she went to a party and someone slipped her a drug and she died. And it was this world of not only will you die if you do drugs, but drugs are going to come kill you.
Right. They'll come find you. Yes. Well, I remember reading, and I think it was the 6th Sweet Valley High book. Did you read Sweet Valley High?
I never read those.
Okay.
I definitely had friends who did.
Yeah. In the 6th one, Regina Morrow does cocaine once and dies. And I was so sure that's how it goes down. That affected me way more than Dare. And then, was Flowers in the Attic? And I keep wanting to say Flowers for Algernon, but Flowers in the Attic part of your childhood?
2 of the big Flowers bestsellers. So I never read it when I was growing up. I remember knowing that it was the scandalous book that people were like, oh man, Flowers in the Attic. And I finally read it just a few years ago because I knew that it was something that a subject that I was researching had read. And I was like, what is this book about? What kind of a portrait do you get of a person by reading a book that they liked if it was Flowers in the Attic? And so I read it. And I don't know what, I'm curious what you think would be a good angle for that, because I would love to talk about it because it does feel like a book that is kind of a rite of passage for girls especially. And it's just really weird.
It's really twisted. And I never read the same girl that turned me on to Go Ask Alice is the one who introduced me to Flowers in the Attic. I never read it, but I bought it and it freaked me out. So I gave it to my mom. And then, later I read the synopsis of it and it has always kind of haunted me just because it's but I guess what I wonder, and I have not answered your question. I'll have to think about what a good angle would be, but I just, you said it, maybe it's rite of passage novels. I mean, maybe there's some whole thing about that, but I mean, a rite of passage spectacular. I don't know if that's too big, but
I love that.
But I do wonder why, what is it about that book that has such a hold on young girls?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I wonder about. I mean, there's the sexuality that you do find in horror, and then there's the taboo aspect. I mean,
I feel like a lot of horror for kids and teens is based on this idea of adults being useless at best and dangerous at worst. So this, spoilers for Flowers in the Attic. So to have a book where the premise is that your mother locks you and your siblings in an attic on purpose and just carries on living her life is so dark in a way that really hits to me a kind of teenage nerve. And also this idea of it's a story of sexual competition between an adolescent girl and her mother, and it's about incest, and I think there's sexual assault as well. And it's like thinking back to the thing, like, because I read a lot of true crime as a tween and teen girl, and I feel like that like hit some of the same pressure points as this, where it's like, what kind of power do people think I have, and what's the worst case scenario for how they're going to treat me because of it? Feels like one of the themes.
Right. Because that's something that like ripples through a lot of horror, right? Is that you will be punished for your sexuality.
Yeah. Whether you are aware of it or not, you're just screwed.
Right. Is it the mother who locks him in the closet, or is it the abusive grandmother?
I feel like I haven't read it in years, but what I remember, which may or may not be true, is that initially we think it's the grandmother's choice, but then it turns out that the mother also wants them up there, but who knows? But I think the mother's definitely a bad guy too. And I think tries to poison them with donuts with poison on them.
It's weird. Like, what is the appeal of reading stuff that is so kind of sadistic, really? And yet, you know, on my Apple News app, and the more you click on a certain kind of story, I believe the more you get that kind of story. And like, I'll just, you know, absentmindedly open it up, and then it's just like instantly like click on the darkest, most awful, and it's always People magazine, and it's like, you know, father murders, you know, wife and twin daughters, and then I'm just like, click. I'm like, why am I doing this? But there's something that's, you
father
know, is
and
obviously
toddler son die in 2 separate car accidents on the same day. Yeah.
And, you know, there is just something that is so compelling about that transgressive stuff. But I don't know. I remember with Flowers in the Attic, I think I made it as far as like one of them wakes up and notices that she like realizes there had been like a needle put in her arm. I think the grandmother had like drugged her.
See, I totally forgot that. This book is just a treasure trove.
It's a treasure trove of awfulness. You know what? You know what else haunted me? And I know that you've done multiple personality disorder, but in psychology, in my psychology class in high school, we watched Sybil.
Oh no!
Doesn't that seem borderline
it seems like
abusive?
Your teacher was hungover. Yeah.
That scared the crap out of me for like, I don't even think I could handle watching it now. And back then they thought it was a true story.
Right.
Anyway.
And they were like, that makes it less scary if it really happened.
I know. Okay. Oh, Whitney C says, what's a creature comfort of hers?
Oh, okay. So of mine.
Yeah.
This is such a great question. I love this. So one like winter snack that I just devised that I think is really great is you make a thing of Lipton's instant chicken noodle soup, and then you pour some instant grits into your soup when it's still really hot and stir it up, and then you have like brothy grits, which I think are just fantastic. That's a creature comfort. Also just instant grits. I think that's the perfect breakfast. It's like, it's zero effort, and to me, something about like a salty thing is much easier to have an appetite for first thing in the morning. And I have this heated mug. It's like a mug that keeps your beverage hot for hours, which is someone who takes forever to drink a single cup of coffee. I really appreciate. So yeah, those are some things that I love.
This mug, is it like, does the mug itself heat up, or is it on a warmer?
It is the mug itself. It's like some kind of, I don't know how it works, but the mug itself does the work.
That sounds cool. All right. Ulysses Atkins says, does she really live across from a scrapyard?
Oh, I did it one time. I lived in a house in Philly for several months, immediately pre-pandemic, that was across the street from a place where they would be like picking up cars with a big magnet and crushing them. And it always made me think of the climax of The Brave Little Toaster.
It just sounds very loud.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do Just Me or Everyone.
Sometimes I ponder on something I have thought or done. Is it just me or everyone?
This is like, there's nothing scandalous about this at all, but I've never told this to anyone.
Oh my God, exclusive.
So, okay. So when I drive to my parents' house from the city, I will go over, I guess, describe exactly where this is. And then if you live nearby, you can try this sometime, or you can, at least picture it. So I have to drive over the Fremont Bridge in Portland and then take the exit that puts you on Highway 30. And so the game that I play with myself, and this is worked out for me maybe 2 times in 10 years for the record, is at the top of the Fremont Bridge, I stop giving the car gas, and then I see if I can coast on the very long downhill enough so that I maintain speed to get through the first light after I get on the highway. And it almost never works, and I always try to make it work. And I guess my mirror everyone is do other people have not just do you try and coast from the top of a hill to the bottom or to some landmark? Do you play a game with yourself while driving? But is there a specific place where you always have to do that, even if it doesn't work?
Do you feel like if it works, then you'll have a good day, or is there any sort of luck or superstition involved?
It just it's so hard for it to happen that it's just really cool when it does. It's like that thing in The Office where they're staring at the DVD menu, waiting for the bouncing icon to go straight into the corner. It's like that. It's it's just very special.
I'm on my way to Portland to try it out now. And then also, do you have a hey, go fuck yourself?
Yes. I mean, it's funny because I feel like I spend most of my day feeling really hateful. But when I'm asked to think of a specific instance, I'm like, man, what do I hate? So many things. But oh, I know. Okay. This is a big one. It's very important. Hey, go fuck yourself, whoever's job it is to give fake coffee cups to people in TV shows. They're always empty. I can always tell. Why not just put something in them? It doesn't have to be liquid. It could be just anything. It's an actor holding a coffee cup. I mean, this has liquid in it. I'm holding a can, but they're just oh, thanks for this coffee.
Right. They're waving it around.
Wave it around and toss it up in the air and just make it obvious that it weighs nothing. Just do better.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, prop designers.
Hey, go fuck yourself.
Sarah, it was so nice having you on the show. It was so nice getting to know you. Please tell everyone where they can find you, what they should look out for, do your plugs, etc.
Yeah. Listen to You're Wrong About if you want to hear about misremembered history and tabloid phenomena. I'm currently doing a series on the Amityville Horror, which is so much fun, and where, spoiler, it turns out that the real horror was your dad all along. And to You Are Good, a feelings podcast about movies.
Wonderful. And the Amityville Horror episodes you're doing, those are with Jamie Loftus, right?
Yeah, those are great.
And she's great. We had her on recently. And are you on social media? Do you do social media very much?
Yeah, I am on Twitter at remember_Sarah. That is a very funny joke that is still topical today.
And if you like what you're hearing, and even if you don't, please leave us a 5-star review, leave us a 5-star rating, and then also a nice comment, please. I'm just straight up asking for it at this point. It just helps out the show so much. And I recently discovered that you can also review podcasts on Spotify, not the whole comment, but the review. So wherever I have a feeling wherever you're listening, you can do this. So rate the podcast, won't you? It helps out. Follow me on social media at Allison Rosen on Twitter and Instagram. Submit your own Just Mirror Everyone's to at ARIYNBF on Twitter. Use the hashtag JMOE, Just Mirror Everyone. I already mentioned Patreon. Listen to my other podcasts, Childish and Upworthy Weekly. But yeah, I think that's it. Sarah, thank you again. Listeners, thank you for listening. I love you. You matter. Goodbye.
Hey, do you know about the Allison Rosen Show?